getting into our conversation for this hour. The Finance Act 2023 made a comeback, or is making a comeback, or all of these things happening at the same time. And joining us this hour, already in the hot seat, is Dr. Alex Kamau, who is a business consultant, and we're looking at the Finance Act 2023, a burden or goodwill. And he's here with us. Good morning.
Good morning to you, Ndu.
How are you doing?
Fine, thank you.
Good to have you here.
Thank you very much.
Finance Act crept back into somehow 2023.
Yes.
We're going to look at what this all means. I tried to crack at it a little bit a couple of days ago, but let's open it up properly today and say, okay, fine, what does it actually mean? But let's welcome you properly with today's proverb, shall we?
Wonderful.
All right.
Proverbs for the whole of this week come from the People's Republic of Algeria. There is an excess of familiarity at the root of all hostility.
What do you think?
There's an excess of familiarity
At the root of all hostility.
at the root of all hostility. I think it talks about that we need to keep our friends close, but our enemies closer. Because the people that inflict the biggest harm and pain to anyone are the people closest to you. So there's a familiarity breeds contempt.
Yes, so they tell us.
So they say.
Yeah.
So basically, I say if you are not close to me, then chances of you hurting me are very minimal, and therefore we should be keen about the people who we keep close to us, our inner circles.
Indeed. Indeed. Okay, well, I guess that interpretation makes sense, and looking at conversations that we'll have. Finance Act 2023, not even through the back door.
Yes.
The front door is flung wide open, and it's walking in boldly and
Yes.
slapping everybody in the face.
Yes.
And we're asking the question, okay, so what exactly does that mean? People were not yet rejoicing when it was, shut down by the courts.
Yes.
And said, okay, that means we're not going to have to pay for a couple of these things. We're not going to have to pay these deductions towards housing levy. We're not going to have to do 1, 2, 3. Maybe fuel will go back to 8% VAT. And then no sooner had that happened, the higher court said, no, we're going back. So what is this, an overview of what all this means?
Thank you very much, Ndu. What that means is that actually nothing changes. Because in the first instance, even after the High Court had quashed the implementation of Finance Act 2023, we had not seen the government implementing the proposed new changes. The fuel was still selling at 18% VAT, 16% VAT. And the salaries were the people earning the high tax, high salary bands from 800,000 and above per month were still subjected to that 5% pay as you earn.
Yes.
So nothing had changed. So I would say something had changed if by the time the High Court had quashed the implementation of Finance Act 2023, the government had acted to implement the new changes. Then after now the Supreme Court came to suspend the implementation of the Finance Act, of implementation of the ruling by the High Court, then we would have said something has changed, but nothing has changed. And it was not supposed to change from the word go, because the moment the Court of Appeal said that it has seen in its wisdom to drop the implementation of Finance Act 2023, that very day or the day after, we had the National Assembly Majority Leader Kimani Ichung'wah saying that that was as a result of judicial activism, and there's no way Finance Act 2023 will be thrown out of the doors. So nothing was supposed to change from the word go.
So we're saying the leader of the majority has the powers and the means to disregard a court order.
That's actually the $1 million question, but he's in record saying that 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 declaration by the Court of Appeal about throwing the Finance Act 2023 will not carry the day. And we have seen the Supreme Court has suspended the implementation of that court ruling. So I feel we will go back to where we were. Finance Act 2023 will be implemented in full.
But don't you think that was out of frustrations? Because Kimani Ichung'wah made a context to what he was saying. So it was out of the frustrations, a government that cannot function entirely. Because once the Finance Act 2024 was rejected, or let me say bill,
Yes.
because it was in the Senate too,
Yes.
then obviously the fallback plan was 2023. So 2023 again is challenged, which had been fully implemented, by the way. 2022, 2023 had been fully implemented. But it's again thrown out, and you're told you cannot even use the former framework to collect taxes. So out of frustrations, do you think it was out of frustrations more than out of the power of being a majority leader in the National Assembly?
That's for sure. It was out of frustration, but whether out of frustration or not, law should always be respected. And a person of his caliber who occupies a very senior position in this government, every word that he utters, he should realize the power that it carries. So if he's seen to oppose the judicial pronouncements, then the kind of precedence that sets is not good for the rest of the country.
I think most of my concern
Yes.
with what happened is this. We are going back to the Finance Bill 2023.
Yes.
However, the Appropriations Act
Yes.
was pegged on the Finance Bill 2024
Yes.
if it was passed.
Yes.
Tie these loose ends for me. How do you reconcile the Finance Bill 2023 and Appropriation Bill 2024? How do you tie it in?
A very good question, Ken. How you tie the two is that when the Appropriation Act was passed and was assented to by the President for 2024-2025, actually it was for the expenditure was at 3.9 trillion as per what was envisioned by the passing of if the Finance Bill 2024 would have passed. But now Finance Bill 2024 did not pass. So what happens? But the president nevertheless assented to Appropriation Bill 2024-2025 at 3.9 trillion.
And this usually happens before the Finance Act. They don't fall at the same time.
They don't fall at the same time, but they have it had to be signed before 30th June of this year.
Yes.
So the president signed that, even after understanding that the Finance Bill 2024 had not been passed. And the two needs to balance, the figure at the Finance Bill and the figure at Appropriation Bill, because it is the revenue side and the expenditure side of the budget. But it was passed. But what happened is soon after it was passed, a supplementary budget was tabled in the Parliament that sought to really streamline the changes that had occasioned the failure of Finance Bill 2024 to be enacted into law. So we saw supplementary budget coming to reduce the budget of the government by 177 billion Kenya shillings.
Okay, hold on.
Yes.
Just that what you've just said.
Yes.
To streamline this expenditure.
Yes, and the
or
revenue.
to streamline the sources of this particular revenue. Can you just explain that a little bit more? Because oftentimes these terms come flying at us and we're like, okay, so what exactly does this mean?
Thank you very much. What I mean is that the expenditure was still anchored at 3.9 trillion.
Yes.
And by the time it was being prepared and it was being prepared, the assumption was that the Finance Bill 2024 would pass. And the Finance Bill, which is actually an omnibus tax law amendment, was to bring to the country an extra or additional 346 billion Kenya shillings. That's what the government was supposed to collect more through the passing or changing of the tax laws under tax under Finance Bill 2024. So that did not happen. So if that now did not happen, out of the 346 billion that the government was anticipating to collect from the passing of the Finance Bill 2024, two things happened. They said, we will borrow more. 346 was divided into two, 177 billion and 169 billion. If you add 177 billion and 169 billion, you get 346 billion. So we said we will borrow more 169 billion, and we will reduce our budget by 177 billion. So they wanted now to really explain or capture that income deficit, 346 billion. The finance bill is not passing.
Yes.
How do we bridge that
We
gap?
still need the money.
We still need the money.
Essentially, yeah.
So we borrow more and we cut our expenditure by 177 billion. And the 177 billion that we did reduce our expenditure, the county government share of revenue was reduced by 20 billion. And the national government was left to reduce its budget by the rest, the remainder, which is 177 minus 20 billion. So the national government reduced its expenditure by 157 billion. And the 157 billion, actually, what received the highest beating is the development expenditure. Because the development expenditure was reduced by 130 billion, and the recurrent expenditure by 27 billion, which was again vice versa. When we are talking about austerity measures, we should really cut down on recurrent expenditure, but not development expenditure. But in this case, the government did the other way around. We reduced our development budget by about 130 billion when the Finance Bill 2024 did not pass. And we are going to borrow more, 169 billion. And the worst part is that this 169 billion we are going to borrow more, now that the revenue expectations have reduced, we are going to borrow domestically.
But let me ask this question. If we say we've cut our expenditure, why then do we need to borrow?
Remember, we were supposed to cut our expenditure by 346 billion, which was not possible.
Well, again, the question, why was it not possible? Let me explain to you why I asked the question.
Yes.
Every time we are told about a budget and we're told about expectations or revenue expectations from the government, yes, which finance bill explains to us how it is now. We are supposed to mop up this money. I then delve into history. How many times in the last 10 years have we actually met our revenue projections? We have actually, okay? And the oddest thing was it was during the COVID times.
That's for sure.
Yes. Now, the reason why we met it,
Yes.
several things happened. One, all these taxes that this particular government
Yes.
seemed to feel if they implemented would raise us more money. At that time, the complete opposite is what was done. Okay. And evidence has shown that even when VAT on fuel went up, the government did not raise more money through the fuel levy. If anything, it raised less. Okay. So here's my question. If it is clear that the government has put in place or had put in place methods that guaranteed would not raise the money that it was supposed to raise. One. Two, when that didn't happen, we had an alternate situation where the bill that was supposed to help raise this money was suspended. Okay? Okay. So here we are. But has anybody come out to tell us why it is all these things that the government keeps saying they need to do must be done? Can we not suspend these projects, except for the very critical one? Can we just not suspend and say for a whole year? But it's been done also. So I'm not saying something that hasn't been done. Kibaki did it. Suspend the development projects. We already have roads. You want to build new one? Stop it. People are used to bad roads. Give them a year and then promise the following year we'll build them. Okay? That's one. Two, I have never seen anywhere it is documented that the money that we supposedly have before we borrow has been insufficient for our needs. Maybe somebody can explain to me how it's documented. I have not seen it. It's the same question we raise with county governments when they tell us that this money is not enough. Yet the one they receive,
we don't know what you've done with it.
I'm not really sure that they have demonstrated conclusively that either there's a shortfall or that it has not met the needs that they have. But it's a narrative that is propagated every time. So, again, with everything that I have said, which are many things,
Yes.
why does the government feel the need to borrow domestically when they haven't demonstrated that the money that we are actually able to collect has been utilized in the manner that they have said it would? Because it hasn't been demonstrated.
And I like that question, City. But let me start by responding to the issue why we cannot stop development budget altogether. And I wish we could, because during times of crisis, desperate measures are supposed to be undertaken. And for instance, the budget for 2023-2024, we had budgeted to incur 800 billion for development expenditure. But at the end of the year, the only money that we used under development expenditure was 250 billion. 250 billion. So we don't exercise prudent financial management. We don't follow what we budget for, because 800 billion, spending 250 billion out of 800.
What happened to the 550?
What the 550 was used under recurrent expenditure.
So what is that, like, keeping the lights on, paying salaries?
No, my
Yes.
Yeah.
tea, mandazi.
Yeah, that's the thing.
Yes.
All those things that you do on a
think
daily.
it's enough, more tea, more mandazi.
Yes. So then the issue of why I don't understand the county government continue to receive money from the national government, whereas the Auditor General every other year gives or raises audit queries saying that the county governments are not able to explain this sum of money.
Yes.
And recently, I think it was in yesterday's newspaper, that the county government of Nairobi has not been able to explain 1.3 billion Kenya shillings in terms of the salary payments. It paid a salary of 11 billion in the year that ended June 2024. But out of those 11 billion, 1.3 billion cannot be explained.
It was expended, but you cannot tell where it went.
It did not go through the salary and remuneration bank account.
Okay.
But don't you think then, Daktari,
Yes.
that in fact the government has actually helped solve this problem for us? Because if we targeted 800 billion for development and we only spent 250, they've told us we needed 250. Okay? Yes.
Yeah, because I was going to ask that. Sorry, CT. I was going to ask that question.
Ahead,
When you say that only 250 billion was spent on development in a particular year,
Yes.
maybe that's what they wanted to spend. It's not that they only had that to spend and that they pushed it and put it in some bins. Maybe that's what decided. Did of all this money that's available,
Yes,
we are going to use 250 for development so that it can show that we've done something. The rest of it,
Bandu, let me ask the question. If let's say 250 billion was spent, in terms of our development record and things we wanted to do, was apart from dams which were not built but were promised, stadiums which were supposed to have been completed but were not built, and all these things that are normally promised in the budget but are never done, did Kenyans stop living and going about their business as they normally do? No, they did not.
They did not.
Okay, so this 550, that was for recurrent expenditure. What on earth were we spending 550 billion shillings on? Salaries? Okay. Auditor General, again.
Yes.
Auditor General comments on counties and we talk of billions. Auditor General comments on national government, talks of a trillion. Somehow there's a trillion. Hey,
a trillion is a million.
Imagine.
It's a lot of
A million.
Yeah, that's for sure.
Yes,
a lot of money.
And she did say she had problems tracing this thing somewhere. So And we wanted to borrow just 170 billion or something. Now, surely, if we found this trillion, which
we don't need to borrow.
What do we need to borrow for? We luckily have excess money.
Yeah, exactly. And you'll be able to sort out all of these things that we're talking about without having to go anywhere looking for the extra. I think we've been asking this question for the longest time. What does it mean when you say that a government is fiscally responsible? When we talk about austerity measures, but then we see that positions are created. And we talk about austerity measures, but we think that there's a lot of spending on things that actually, you know what, you could actually get by with, standing around a table and having a teacup. But we see that this makes for government spending into the millions. How can you say we want to be financially prudent, whereby we see on this other side so much spending? How can the two work?
What do you mean by financial prudence? When you say financial prudence,
well, I mean,
especially in a government,
it's making decisions whereby you must be prudent, especially whereby you have huge responsibility when it comes to the things that you should be using to protect livelihoods. When we're talking about education, what are we looking at today? When we're talking about health, just take a walk around the country. And then you're saying, you can be lavish on one side, whereby we're asking you to be prudent, and you can't.
Let me ask the question. Would you then say that we have a very clear understanding of how our financial jurisprudence is structured? We understand it, and it is clear. But this discussion that we're having seems to point to an executive that is determined to ignore those very structures and to simply implement what they think suits them best.
What would that look like?
A good question. Actually, for me, financial prudence means cutting your clothes according to your size. But the government is not doing that. And why I say that is because we continue even to borrow at very high interest rates, because financial prudence encompasses even how you are sourcing your money. At 18% for treasury bills and treasury bonds, I wonder where does government plan to invest that money so that it can be able to pay that loan at that percentage. Why I'm saying that is because out of all the companies that have shares listed in Nairobi Securities Exchange, there's none that pays dividends at a rate of 10% of what you have invested.
None.
There's none. There's none. So that is causing even what we call crowding out of the private sector. Because instead of you and I investing money to the companies that are listed in Securities Exchange, Nairobi Securities Exchange, we are taking money to the government. So there is imbalance because the government is not in the business of making investment. The private sector is better in doing that. If you give private sector a shilling, it will be able to make it 2 shillings, 3 shillings over time. But the government does not do that. I usually find it very, 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 very interesting that the government is borrowing at a very punitive rate of 18%. And even the person that you are borrowing from is not able to invest his money at such a rate.
Why would somebody be willing to actually borrow at that very high rate? Well, what is it that would drive somebody? Because it's not just risky, it's very risky. Why? Because the exposure is enormous.
It's called moral hazard.
Yes.
Moral hazard is a concept where the doer of the action is not responsible for the outcome of his actions. He is not bothered. It's for instance, you have a matatu and you have hired a driver. This driver might misuse this vehicle, ride it on pavements, does all manner of things. But when the car has a mechanical issue, it is not him.
It is you.
Yes, it is the owner who will cater for those repairs. The same thing, the government, even including what we see today, like now the CBC, the CBA, that the teachers are clamoring for its implementation. Someone who was in the government 5 years ago promised teachers that they would raise their salaries.
Yes.
And they knew very well they will not be there 5 years to come. So the government of the day will take care, will sort out that problem. So financial prudence is basically planning for today and also putting future in mind.
And being cautious, is it not?
Being cautious.
Is it not being cautious? Because
Yes.
you can say, and maybe from a financial point of view, you can maybe correct, but wouldn't you want to, I've often said that if you're not taking care of the very basic for your citizenry, then you have no business in government.
They say,
maybe extreme, but...
It makes sense because they say when you take care of pennies, the pounds will take care of themselves. And it is the small leak that will sink the ship. And what I'm seeing, like recently, we were downgraded by all the three major credit rating agencies, international credit rating agencies. Moody's started and downgraded the credit rating of Kenya, the sovereign financial instruments that Kenya offers, that is treasury bonds and euro bonds. Then Fitch followed. Then just the other day, S&P followed. And by doing so, they also downgraded three financial institutions here in Kenya. NCBA received a beating, KCB and INM. And
the main lenders to the government.
Yes. They are the main lenders to the government. Yeah. And actually, it's like also these credit rating agencies, they are calling out on these commercial banks that the main essence that you exist is to really facilitate and foster growth in the private sector by giving them credit. But why are you giving credit to the... Making it very expensive.
Giving them very high interest.
Very high interest. So, and there's something that they say that when the target becomes the measure, then when the measure becomes the target, then it ceases to be a good measure. When the measure becomes the target, then it ceases to be a good measure. And what I mean by that, if the measure of financial performance by commercial banks is how much they lend, how much they earn or how much money they make from lending. I think that is mismatched because they can as well lend to international borrowers, and by doing so, they deny locals that credit. That would not really help them to achieve the goal that they were made to exist in the first place.
But then if we take your view, then are you then suggesting or are you saying that this brings about a situation that could perhaps be an overexposure for the banks?
It is already.
They are exposed.
They are already exposed in a big way.
I'm silent because that one is not good. There's a country in West Africa called Ghana where the stories began just like these ones of ours. There was not much of a difference. And what then set this house of cards tumbling was when they defaulted. And then suddenly, it was chaotic. Completely chaotic.
It's likely to happen here.
Yes, it is very likely because any investment of the nature, whether it's in government paper or whether it's in securities, suddenly the value didn't take a dip, it took a dive. And everything that previously had been certain was now up in the air completely. Completely up in the air.
And they were forced to take haircuts.
Serious haircuts.
One of the things that the government has spoken about is how to manage the wage bill. There are two areas of our finances that we hemorrhage seriously. One is payment on loans, and secondly, the recurrent expenditure. The heaviest is salaries, which takes about 1.1 T out of the whole budget. Then followed by, and I just saw a story yesterday also that the expenditure in running of the government offices has crossed the 1
trillion mark.
1 trillion mark.
The-
So
the-
that is
the what?
expenditure
expenditure.
for running the government. Forget about salaries. Forget about the other expenses. Salary, which is a constant, just to run them. Motor vehicles, I assume flowers,
Yes,
mandazi
yes.
and tea,
Newspapers and
newspapers
things like
and all.
that.
Yes.
For the first time, crossed the 1 T mark.
Wait. So we already at 2 T.
Yes, without development.
Yeah.
I like tea because when it says trillion, I get depressed. We are 2 T.
Yes,
Yes.
And it's just government doing its business
recurrent.
on our behalf.
Yeah.
Recurrent.
Keeping the lights on, doing the runarounds, having fuel in vehicles and things like that.
You must not leave out choppers, Lundu.
Yeah, of course, that's, and not doing anything. So, not doing anything developmentally.
Nothing. They've not touched it at
Has not
all.
been touched at all.
Let's add another 1.2 trillion for debt servicing.
Yes, so it's
Which is
debt
the
and
first
recurrent.
charge.
Yes, which is the first
So
charge.
this is 3.6.
Yes, trillion.
3.6.
It's an entire budget. That's the entire budget
Yes.
void of development.
Zero.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the question.
Yes.
How can you say that actually government is being run in a cautious, if CT doesn't like prudent, in a
Oh, I
cautious,
like
Oh,
prudent.
you like prudent?
I just wanted you to explain what you meant. You meant by it.
Yeah.
Yes.
So in this case, how do we say that it's being run in that manner if your entire annual budget, which is supposed to be combination of development as well as these other things, is not even being met? Is it not just staring down this dangerous rabbit hole then of number one, default, number two, underdevelopment, number three, continually being delisted on these three lists that you've talked about?
Yes, I wouldn't say that the government is exercising prudent financial management. It is doing completely the opposite. And the hole that we find ourselves in, we are only digging it deeper. Because, as I had said, that the government of the day probably is envisioning that in the next 5 years, either it will not be there or they will cross the bridge once
When
they get there. So it's very sad. It's very sad. And what actually saddens me the most is that right now, the borrowing cost, the central bank rate, is at 12.75%. They reduced the other day by 0.25% from 13% to 12.75%. And that did not make much change in terms of facilitating better access of credit by the private sector. Right now, if you go to any commercial bank, you are likely to get a loan facility from a rate of 22 to 23%. And that's what has made the money become so scarce in the economy. And you wonder why the government is not understanding that, because they are saying that we are having money stock out. And because we are having money stock out, we need to print more money. Even if you print more money and you make it very expensive for the private sector to access, you will still print more money. Because yes, the solution that you are coming up is not addressing the problem of the day.
The problem is who sits at who is in charge of our monetary policy and the fiscal policy. I think that's where our problem is.
Yes.
But before City comes in, I like to ask this as my final question.
Yes.
The president the other day said that in the next budget, we will do what is called zero budgeting. Is this a solution?
First of all, what is zero budgeting?
It means, now what they do is they start from the existing. So last year we gave you 30 billion. This year, let's add 5. Or no, you didn't utilize. Let's subtract 3. You have 27.
That is zero budgeting.
Yeah, that is, so what they are doing from next year, according to the president, is we are looking at a sector. We are looking at the education sector and budgeting based on need from zero. We are not considering.
Wait a moment. What have they been doing all this time?
Adding.
So
So they
to
say
the
we
budget.
gave you 30 billion last year. Let's add you 2 on
No,
top.
I understand, but you add because you've understood there's a need to add, isn't it?
No, but in
because-
this
no,
case, you're just adding, so it would appear as though we gave you
Budgeting
something.
corruption.
Just keep quiet over there.
Yes,
No,
budget.
but-
They
but-
used to budget for
But
corruption. in there.
budgeting presupposes that there's a plan based on need, isn't it?
One
Yeah,
would
that's for
hope.
sure. That's
One
Not
would
for a
hope.
government.
One would hope, and maybe stop me if I'm wrong, Dr.
Yes,
Kamau.
yes.
But you look at the landscape.
Yes.
I mean, just from basic business 101, that's what budgeting is. You look at the landscape and you
Yes.
say, okay, these are the needs 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is the kind of money that we have. We're going to apply that over the need. However, not just apply it,
Yes.
but we're going to say it's going to run in this manner
Yes, yes.
for this period of time, and that will allow us. If we don't have enough, we're going to get it from somewhere else,
Yes,
but we're
yes.
going to make sure that we can fill the gaps. No? Okay. It doesn't appear as
Will it work? Will it work?
It should work. It should work. It is a bit more cumbersome. And to start with, there are many types of budgets. The one that the government has been used is incremental budgeting. And incremental budgeting is the one that you have explained very well, that the previous year we had given the Ministry of Education 6 billion. So because we have expanded the budget, we can only also increase what we had allocated to them by maybe 10%.
This is an acceptable practice.
It
Yes.
is not a good practice.
But
There
it's
are times
acceptable.
that it is relevant, especially when you don't have much planning time.
What do you mean we
You
don't
have
have
a
much
whole
plan?
year.
A whole
Yeah.
finance- How?
This
Yes.
September.
Yes.
September is
Yes.
when the budget process
Starts.
actually starts for next year's
next year.
budget.
Yes.
So what are we talking about that there's no time?
No, I'm saying there are cases when incremental budgeting is appropriate,
Okay.
but not for the case of the government. And
When is it appropriate?
when it is appropriate is when the expenditure does not change much. But right now, but in terms of the government, the expenditure does change a lot, because this year we want the Ministry of Education to be allocated more money because of constructing more classes for grade 9. But if we increase the budget by 100 billion because of that, then next year.
Dr. Mao,
Yes.
what you've just said vis-a-vis the classroom, that's voodoo. You know why?
Yes, yes.
When people exit
Yes,
the system that we currently have in secondary school,
Yes.
there'll be empty classes.
that's true.
All right? Empty. There'll be no students. The classes have already been built. They exist. What are we building new classes for? Which is easier, to build new classes or to move students into those empty classes?
That will happen, but that notwithstanding, the population is also growing.
By 1 million.
The population is also growing.
Yes. It tends to grow. In fact,
Yes.
which leads me to the question that I actually had in mind before
Yes.
I subtract myself.
Yes.
Under what circumstances would we have a situation where not much changes? Because you mentioned that perhaps there are situations where this incremental way of going about your business affairs is when perhaps there hasn't been very much change. What would occasion a situation where there isn't much change? There's always change.
There's always change. At the government level, there's always change. But at the household level, maybe nothing much is changing at the household level.
In terms of demand, in terms of needs.
Yes. Even your salary, your salary, if it is 100,000, it is likely to remain that for the next 2 to 3 years. So the budget for this year will be the budget for the subsequent year, until maybe you have a different source of income. But for the government, the dynamics are different. Many
How?
things change. Because the larger the government is, the more center of expenditure it has, and the more the movements. Because like now we are talking that the government has got 347 parastatals.
How many?
347 parastatals.
Hey, there are that many.
There are that many.
Without margin or plus?
Without margin.
Without margin. Okay.
Without margin. And for instance, now with the issue of margin, that's when the zero budget, the zero budgeting will be more applicable, because if a certain ministry had about 10 parastatals, and these parastatals have been condensed into 5, then we cannot continue to use incremental budgeting, where we are saying that ministry had given them 200 billion. Now we are going to add 10% of that, because the reason why we are merging and consolidating the number of parastatals that we have is to really work on the wage bill.
You know, there's what you've just described to me. If I were to juxtapose it with conversations that politicians in this country have, especially those who are currently in power, it's what you call vacuum activity. A lot is done. There's a lot of dust raised, but it's a zero-sum game. Nothing much is achieved. The president was in Nyamira. He promised them a university. There was a working group that among the things they suggested was that we should merge universities. We should rationalize this entire process vis-a-vis student population, courses, and so forth, which means reduce the number of universities. He goes and promises them a university. Okay? So, it's a good promise. Mm-hmm. People equate universities with all manner of imaginary things. Okay? But it will not achieve anything. So, when we have 347 parastatals, what it tells me is that our idea of development is to grow the bulge of government so that we can do whatever it is we do and increase the expenditure of government. That is our idea of how we can grow economy. You expand the government. You expand parastatals. You expand people to pay. You expand the running of all these entities.
Everything is expanding.
You expand it. And so money that is meant for development is then excised and put into recurrent so that we can expand it. That's the idea. Surely, which country on this planet has grown with that sort of plan and design? Which one? Or are we pioneering this thing?
None. It's very sad. And actually, one thing I don't like is that also the government continue to fund public universities, because public universities should be actually be on the front line in terms of exercising creativity. We should see public universities actually coming to train the SMEs and charging them some fees, so that they can
should have partnership with such institutions.
Yes. And we, for instance, to publish an article in a journal, sometimes we pay even 100,000. And these public universities can also create their own journals, so that scholars in Kenya, instead of going to publish their articles in Europe and in America, they can as well be publishing here in Kenya. And if I'm publishing an article, I pay 100,000 to Nairobi University, and that 100,000 will help the university to be more self-sufficient.
Dr. Kamau, when you look across board, it's not for want of expertise in Kenya. It's not for want of ideas. It's not for want of even the resources, whether you want to look at it from a human perspective or anything else. The experts reside in Treasury. They literally are crunching the numbers. They know what to advise. The people who are in the education sector, the experts who sit behind that we can't see them, they are there. They know what to advise. Kenya has a wealth of human resource who would then be able to know what to do. But it would appear to me that this is just a case of a behavior that doesn't allow you to do the right thing and to do it consistently in a sustained manner. So you cannot have that proper behavior when it comes to fiscal responsibility. So it seems like it's a character issue as opposed to a resource and expertise issue. Is that the case?
Exactly. It's an attitude issue. It's a culture issue. We have a lot of brilliant people and good ideas, ideologies, but the government likes operating in chaos and in a place where there is no order. So that misappropriation and mismanagement of public funds can continue. And if I'm hiring someone, I am not so much interested about your skill level. I'm interested with your attitude. If your attitude is right, we can always train you for skills. But if your skills are okay, and you have attitude issue, even if we do what, it will not be able to change you. You could be a drunkard, you could be a person who does not respect time, you could be a person who does not respect deadlines, but you are highly skilled. So I always put attitude before skills. And for, as we have put it the government, what we have, we are not deficient of resources or good brains. What we have is a character issue, which is an attitude issue, which is highly would take so much time to change.
Or maybe divine intervention at this rate.
Maybe divine intervention.
Dr. Alex Kamau, thank you so much for being here this morning. Let's see what happens. But again, I think a lot more deliberation is needed here to sort out some of these issues so we don't go the way that we've seen a lot of others go. Thank you for being in the hot seat this morning.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.